Fourth, my sister Chloe looked me dead in the eye, her voice as cold as the December air outside her perfect mansion. Honestly, Maya, she said, loud enough for everyone at the Christmas dinner table to hear, nobody would even notice if you weren't here. The laughter from her husband, Trent, was the nail in the coffin. That was the moment the ground fell out from under me. Have you ever been made to feel so small that you almost disappear? That night, I made a promise to myself. They wanted a nobody? Fine. But one day, they would have to look me in the eye and see a somebody they could never have imagined. This is the story of how I kept that promise. The smell of pine and simmering cloves hit me the moment I stepped through the oversized front door of my sister's house. It was a palace of beige and white, a sterile monument to success that felt more like a showroom than a home. Every surface gleamed under the recessed lighting. The Christmas tree was a 10-foot-tall monster, professionally decorated in silver and gold, without a single handmade ornament or hint of personal history. It was perfect, just like Chloe, and I was the glaring, imperfect stain on their pristine canvas. I clutched the gift in my hands, the paper already feeling a little crumpled and cheap in this environment. I was the family failure, the cautionary tale, the younger sister who had the gall to drop out of a prestigious business degree program because it was crushing my soul. I'd tried to explain that I wanted to do something creative, something that mattered to me, but all they heard was unemployed. Now, at 26, I worked a dead-end admin job that barely covered the rent on my tiny drafty apartment, while Chloe and her husband Trent collected promotions and real estate like they were grocery coupons. Maya, you made it, my mother Carol said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Her eyes did a quick worried scan of my outfit, a simple black dress I'd bought on clearance. It was the nicest thing I owned. You look neat, she concluded, which was her way of saying I didn't embarrass her too badly. My father Richard gave me a brief, awkward hug. Good to see you, kiddo. Trent's just opening a bottle of something very expensive. You'll have to try it. The whole family was there, orbiting Chloe and Trent like planets around a binary star. Trent, with his slicked back hair and a smug grin that never left his face, was a vice president at some faceless tech corporation. Chloe had leveraged her business degree into a high-powered marketing career, and then, upon marrying Trent, into the even more high-powered career of managing their portfolio. I found a spot on the edge of the sprawling leather sofa and placed my gift on the mountain of perfectly wrapped presents under the tree. I'd spent my last $50 on it, money that should have gone to my heating bill. It was a custom-framed print of a star map, showing the exact alignment of the constellations on the night they got engaged. I thought it was thoughtful, personal, something that money couldn't just buy off a shelf. Later, after a dinner of dry turkey and stilted conversation, Chloe announced, "Time for presents." She sat on the floor like a queen, distributing gifts with practiced grace. When she finally got mine, she held it up with a theatrical curiosity. "Oh, from Maya. How sweet." Trent took it from her and ripped the paper off with careless efficiency. He stared at the frame for a long moment, his brow furrowed. "A map?" he said, turning it around for everyone to see. "What are we supposed to do with this, Maya?" He didn't say it cruelly, but with genuine dismissive confusion, which was somehow worse. A hot flush crept up my neck. I tried to explain. "It's the night sky from when you got engaged." I thought it was romantic. Chloe took the frame and gave it a cursory glance. She smiled, that tight, condescending smile of hers, the one that showed all her teeth but none of her warmth. "It's sweet, for you." The subtext was clear. A sweet idea for a poor person. A sentimental gesture from someone who couldn't afford a real gift. She then did the most brutal thing she could have done. She walked over to a side table, cluttered with half-empty glasses, and placed the gift face down, forgotten. An irrelevant piece of clutter. My $50, my thoughtful gesture, tossed aside like a used napkin. The heat in my cheeks turned into a burning fire of humiliation. I saw Mrs. Gable, a dear old friend of my mother's, and the closest thing our family had to an impartial observer, watching the exchange. Her expression wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something more complex, a kind of sad understanding. She knew exactly what had just happened. My parents, of course, said nothing. They were the professional enablers, their silence a testament to their unwillingness to ever rock Chloe's perfectly curated boat. Later, as we sat back down at the glittering dining table for dessert, my father stood up, his wine glass held high. "A toast," he announced, beaming, "to Trent and his recent promotion to senior director. We are all so proud of the empire you two are building." Everyone raised their glasses, murmuring their congratulations. I was a second too late, my mind still replaying the gift fiasco. My glass was halfway to my lips when Chloe's eyes locked onto mine. She saw her opening. She always did. Her voice cut through the cheerful chatter, sharp and clear and cold. "Honestly, Maya," she said, a look of bored nonchalance on her face, "nobody would even notice if you weren't here." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Every eye was on me. Trent let out a short, barking chuckle, a sound that drilled directly into my skull. My father's smile faltered, and he cleared his throat, suddenly fascinated by a spot on his wineglass. My mother, the queen of conflict avoidance, immediately jumped in. "Oh, Chloe, don't be silly. Who wants more pie?" "Mrs. Gable, you must have another slice." But the damage was done. The words hung in the air, vibrating with truth. I was a ghost at their feast, a nobody. I looked across the table and saw Mrs. Gable again. This time, her look was one of pure, unadulterated pity. It was the look you give a wounded animal you know you can't help. I didn't wait for pie. I felt my body moving before my mind had even caught up. I stood up, my chair scraping softly against the polished hardwood floor. No one tried to stop me. I walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer, and out the front door into the biting December wind. I didn't grab my coat. The cold was a welcome shock, a pain that was physical and real, a distraction from the crushing weight in my chest. I walked the 10 blocks to the bus stop, the thin fabric of my dress doing nothing to stop the wind that whipped around me. Each step was a promise, each shiver was a vow. That night, huddled in my tiny apartment under a thin blanket, the heat finally working but offering no real warmth, the humiliation didn't fade. It didn't dissolve into tears. It crystallized. It hardened into something solid and sharp in the center of my being. A resolve so cold and clear it scared me. They wanted me to be a nobody. They had made it abundantly clear, fine, I would be a nobody. I would disappear from their lives so completely that they would forget my face. But I would not stay a nobody forever. I would build myself into a somebody. In secret, piece by painful piece. And one day, years from now, they would be forced to see me. And they would see a person so far beyond their comprehension that the memory of this night would burn them like shame. That was the promise I made to the ghost in the mirror. The weeks that followed Christmas were a miserable gray blur. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment, the menu consisting of a rotation of instant noodles and canned soup. The sharp resolve I'd felt on Christmas night had dulled into a persistent, grinding self-doubt. Chloe's words echoed in my head on a loop. "Nobody would even notice if you weren't here." Maybe she was right. Then, the universe decided to prove her point. My boss at the admin job, a kind but perpetually stressed woman named Sarah, called me into her office. She couldn't meet my eye. "Maya, I'm so sorry," she began, and I knew what was coming. "We're restructuring, and your part-time position, it's being eliminated." Restructuring. The corporate word for "you're the easiest to get rid of." I was replaceable, a line item on a budget sheet that could be erased without a second thought. I packed my sad little desk plant and the one mug I liked into a cardboard box and walked out, feeling even more invisible than I had at Chloe's mansion. The first of the month came and went. My bank account, already anemic, was now on life support. A few days later, a bright orange slip of paper was taped to my apartment door. An eviction notice. It felt less like a legal document and more like a formal declaration from the world that I was, officially, a failure. It was a physical manifestation of my family's opinion of me, a bright, ugly confirmation of my worthlessness. My mother called, her voice a cocktail of anxiety and passive aggression. "Maya, honey, are you okay? I haven't heard from you." I told her about the job. There was a long pause. "Oh dear," she finally said. "Well, maybe this is for the best. You know, your father and I have been saying, perhaps you should just call Chloe. Apologize for running out like that. I'm sure Trent could find a place for you at his company. Even just answering phones. It would be a start." The thought of it made me physically ill. The idea of sitting in some sterile lobby, taking orders, being a charity case under Trent's smug supervision, it was unthinkable. "No, Mom," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I'll figure something out." "Don't be so proud, Maya," she sighed, the disappointment thick in her voice. "Pride doesn't pay the rent." My days dissolved into a depressing routine. I'd wake up, drink cheap coffee, and spend hours scrolling through job sites. My resume was a patchwork of failed starts and dead-end positions. I was qualified for nothing and overqualified for things I couldn't bear to do. Each rejection email, or worse, the complete silence, was another little tap from the hammer, chipping away at what little confidence I had left. One night, unable to sleep, I was deep down an internet rabbit hole. I wasn't even looking for anything specific, just clicking from one link to another, trying to distract myself from the gnawing panic in my stomach. I clicked on an article about emerging business trends, then one about ecotourism, and then I found it. A small but growing niche industry, sustainable and ethical event planning. It was about creating beautiful, memorable events that were also kind to the planet. Zero-waste catering, carbon-neutral transport, locally sourced materials. It was like a light bulb switched on in a dark room. It was the perfect marriage of the two sides of me. My family had always seen as being at war. My artistic eye, my love for creating beautiful experiences, and the business acumen I'd been told I'd foolishly abandoned. It felt right. It felt like something I could be good at, something I could believe in. I started researching frantically. I found blogs, case studies, and finally an online certification course, Green Event Management. It was comprehensive, covering everything from logistics and supply chains to marketing and client relations. It felt like a real path forward, and then I saw the price. $200 might as well have been $2 million. It was money I absolutely did not have. The eviction notice on my door seemed to mock me. I sat there for an hour staring at the enrollment page, my heart sinking. It was so close, a potential escape hatch, and I couldn't even afford the key. Then I remembered. My grandmother's locket. It was the one thing of real value I owned, tucked away in the back of my jewelry box. It was a simple gold-filled locket she'd given me before she passed away, a secret between us. Chloe had gotten the diamond earrings. I had gotten the locket. It was the one piece of my history that wasn't tainted by my family's judgment. The next morning, I walked into a grimy pawn shop that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. The man behind the counter barely looked at it before offering me $250. I didn't haggle. I took the cash, my hands shaking, feeling like I'd just sold a piece of my soul. I walked straight home, sat down at my laptop, and paid for the course. As I typed in my credit card information and the crumpled bills sat on my desk, I felt a strange mix of guilt and exhilarating freedom. As I clicked the final enroll button, a feeling I hadn't felt in years washed over me. It was hope. A tiny, fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. This wasn't for them. This wasn't to prove them wrong or to get their approval. This was for me. This was the first brick in a new foundation, laid on the rubble of my old life. The online course became my obsession, my entire world. My tiny apartment, once a symbol of my failure, transformed into a war room. I covered one wall in corkboard, pinning up notes on logistics, flowcharts for zero-waste sourcing, and mind maps of potential vendor networks. I woke up before the sun, my mind buzzing with ideas about carbon-neutral transport and ethical supplier contracts. I went to bed late, my dreams filled with spreadsheets and seating charts. I devoured every module, every lecture, every case study. This wasn't like college, which had felt like a series of abstract hoops to jump through. This felt real, tangible, and deeply personal. I wasn't just learning, I was building an arsenal. After weeks of intense study, I channeled all of this new knowledge into a single, massive project. I created a hypothetical company, calling it Viridian Events. The name felt right, green, true, vibrant. I then wrote the business plan. It wasn't just a class assignment, it was my masterpiece, 50 pages of meticulous detail, from a 3-year financial projection and a multi-tiered marketing strategy to sample client proposals and a complete ethical sourcing guide. I poured every ounce of my creativity and newfound analytical skill into that document. Holding the printed and bound copy in my hands, it felt like the first truly substantial thing I had ever created. But a plan, no matter how brilliant, is just paper. To make Viridian Events a reality, I needed capital, real money. My first stop was the bank. I put on my one decent dress, the black one from Christmas, and met with the loan officer. He was a young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked at my 50-page plan with polite disinterest. He skimmed the executive summary, saw I had no collateral, no credit history to speak of, and no practical experience. He gave me a thin, pitying smile and offered me a brochure for a high-interest credit card. The rejection was swift and humiliating. The second bank didn't even grant me a meeting. Desperation began to creep back in. I couldn't go back to my parents. I couldn't face the "I told you so." I spent my nights searching for local angel investors, sifting through articles and business registries, looking for anyone who might take a chance on a nobody with a big idea. Most were venture capitalists looking for the next tech unicorn, not a niche event planner. Then, I found a name: Arthur Vance. The name was a local legend, a ghost from the city's recent past. Arthur Vance had been the king of hospitality, the man who built the prestigious Vance Hotel Group from a single property into a 5-star empire. He was known for his impeccable taste, his ruthless business sense, and his absolute commitment to quality. But a decade ago, he had lost everything. In a story that was still whispered about in business circles, he'd been forced out in a hostile takeover, a brutal corporate coup orchestrated by his own son-in-law. Since then, he had become a recluse. It was a long shot, the longest of shots. But his story resonated with me. He knew what it was like to be betrayed by family. I found a generic email address for a small holding company listed under his name. With nothing left to lose, I attached my Viridian Events business plan and wrote a short, direct message. I didn't beg. I just stated my vision and said my plan was attached for his consideration. I hit send and expected nothing. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A new email. The sender, A. Vance. The message was 5 words long. My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late. My heart hammered against my ribs. The address wasn't a sleek corporate tower, but a quiet side street above a small independent cafe. The next morning, I stood outside, my business plan clutched in my sweaty hands. I walked up a narrow, creaking staircase to a door with a simple brass plate that read Vance. His office was a dusty, book-filled room that smelled of old paper and leather. It was the office of a deposed king, living in exile, surrounded by the relics of his former empire. Arthur Vance himself sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He was a grim, imposing man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to see right through me. He didn't offer me a seat. He simply gestured to the chair opposite him and said, "Be." For the next hour, he tore my business plan to shreds. He didn't raise his voice. His critique was cold, precise, and surgical. Your projected Q3 revenue is optimistic by 40%. Where is your contingency for a primary supplier failure? He asked, pointing a finger at a spreadsheet. Your marketing plan targets millennials, but your budget ignores the primary digital ad platforms they use. Why? This ethical sourcing clause is legally vague. A smart client could drive a truck through it. He questioned every number, every assumption, every single word. My voice shook at first, but as I began to defend my work, a strange confidence took hold. I had lived and breathed this plan for weeks. I knew it inside and out. I explained my reasoning, cited my sources, and parried his thrusts with my own logic. Finally, he leaned back in his leather chair, the springs groaning in protest. He steepled his fingers and stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute. The silence was more intimidating than his questions. Your family thinks you're a loser, don't they? He said, his voice a low rumble. The question caught me completely off guard. I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight. A flicker of something, not quite a smile, crossed his lips. Good, he said. So did mine. My daughter, my son-in-law. They saw my commitment to quality as a weakness, an old man's sentimentality. They used it against me to steal my company. That's why they won. He slid a single piece of paper and a pen across the desk. It was a loan agreement. He was offering me $20,000 in seed money. My heart leaped. Then I read the terms. They were brutal. He wanted 40% equity in my company. A massive chunk. This isn't a gift, Miss Jensen, he warned, his eyes locking onto mine. This is not charity. This is a bet. I'm betting on that look in your eye. The one that says you have nothing to lose and everything to prove. I'm betting on your hunger. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Don't make me regret it. I picked up the pen, my hand steady now. I signed my name. I had just sold away nearly half of a company that didn't even exist yet, but I had also just gained an ally. A wounded, cynical, brilliant ally. And for the first time, I wasn't alone. The next 6 months were the hardest, most grueling, and most fulfilling of my life. I lived and breathed the Viridian events from my cramped apartment, which now served as a home, office, and warehouse. Arthur's $20,000 felt like a fortune, but it vanished with terrifying speed. There were business licenses, liability insurance, website hosting fees, and the cost of creating professional-looking marketing materials. Every dollar was meticulously tracked in a spreadsheet that I updated daily. I became ruthlessly frugal, my diet still revolving around cheap carbs, but now it felt like a strategic sacrifice, not a mark of poverty. I did everything myself. I was the CEO, the marketing department, the bookkeeper, and the janitor. My days were a blur of cold calling potential vendors. I'd spend hours on the phone, trying to convince local organic farms, sustainable bakeries, and green printing companies to partner with a brand new, unproven company. Most of them said no. You're too new, a farmer told me gruffly. Call me back when you've actually planned an event. Your ideas are too niche, a caterer said, dismissively. People want steak and potatoes, not quinoa and kale. Rejection became my constant companion. For every one maybe, I got 20 no's. The loneliness was profound. There were days I would sit at my desk staring at the phone, my stomach in knots, too paralyzed by the fear of hearing another rejection to make the next call. Arthur was a harsh and distant mentor. He never offered a word of praise or encouragement. His communication came in the form of curt emails and the occasional brusque phone call. After I sent him my first draft of a marketing pamphlet, his reply was a single sentence. The copy is weak, and the layout is amateurish. Do it again. When I proudly told him I'd secured a verbal agreement with a new linen supplier, he shot back. Is the agreement in writing? Did you account for rainfall insurance in the outdoor event clause? Don't tell me about your victories until the check has cleared. Each critique felt like a small sting, but he was always right. His relentless criticism forced me to be better, more meticulous, more professional. He was tempering my passion with hard-nosed pragmatism, forging me into someone who couldn't be easily dismissed. My first breakthrough, my first real event, was a booth at a local farmer's market. I spent $100 I couldn't afford on the registration fee. I built the booth myself over a weekend, using reclaimed wood pallets I got for free from a local hardware store. I sanded them down until my hands were raw and stained them with a non-toxic finish. I designed my own biodegradable pamphlets and had them printed on recycled paper. The booth looked rustic, professional, and completely out of place among the tables of tomatoes and jam. For 2 days I stood there, smiling until my face hurt, trying to engage with people who were mostly just trying to buy cheese. I handed out dozens of pamphlets. Most people glanced at them and tossed them in the nearest recycling bin. By the end of the second day, I was exhausted, demoralized, and ready to pack it all in. Then, a woman approached my booth. She had been circling it for a while, and she was holding one of my pamphlets. "Viridian Events?" she asked. "I'm the director of a small non-profit, the City Gardens Initiative. We need to plan a fundraising gala for about 50 people next month. And our budget is, well, it's a shoestring." My heart started pounding. "I can work with any budget," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That non-profit gala became my entire focus. The budget was so small that there was no room for error. I poured my soul into it. I negotiated with a local, family-owned restaurant to cater at cost in exchange for a prominent sponsorship mention. I designed the decorations myself, creating beautiful centerpieces out of repurposed glass jars, twine, and cuttings from a community garden. I organized a silent auction with items I had solicited from dozens of local businesses. I was the planner, the decorator, the coordinator, and the cleanup crew. The night of the event, I was a nervous wreck, running around with a clipboard, making sure every detail was perfect. The event itself was small and quiet, held in a rented community hall, but it was elegant. It was heartfelt. And it was a success. They raised more money than they had in the previous 5 years combined. After it was all over, and I was packing up the last of the decorations, the director found me. She handed me an envelope. "This is your fee," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "And this is a little extra from our board. We've never had an event run so smoothly. You are truly talented, Maya." I walked home that night, bone-tired but buzzing with a feeling I'd never experienced before. I opened the envelope under a streetlight. Inside was a check. My total profit for a month of non-stop back-breaking work was $500. But underneath the check was a letter. It was a glowing, heartfelt testimonial, praising my creativity, my professionalism, and my unwavering commitment to their mission. I held that letter in my hands, reading it over and over again. $500 wasn't going to change my life. But that testimonial? It felt like winning an Oscar. It was proof. Tangible, written proof that I could do this. I wasn't a failure. I was an event planner. I was the founder of Viridian Events. And I was just getting started. That first glowing testimonial was like a key turning in a lock. It gave my fledgling company something invaluable: credibility. I featured it prominently on my simple website. And slowly, things began to change. The nonprofit director referred me to another small organization. That client led to another. My work was still small scale: community fundraisers, art gallery openings, workshops, but it was consistent. I was building a portfolio and a reputation for being meticulous, creative, and principled. I was finally able to pay my rent on time, and upgrade from instant noodles to pasta. Then, about 8 months after my farmer's market debut, I got the email that would change everything. It was from a mid-sized tech company, a direct competitor of the firm where my brother-in-law, Trent, worked. They were planning their annual corporate retreat for 200 employees and were looking for a planner. The budget they outlined was staggering. It was more money than I had made in the entire previous year, combined. My heart hammered in my chest as I read it. This was the break I had been working for. This was the leap from small time to the big leagues. I spent a week crafting the perfect proposal, detailing a fully sustainable, 3-day retreat at a lakeside lodge, complete with farm-to-table catering, carbon offset travel arrangements, and team-building exercises focused on environmental conservation. I sent it off, my hands shaking. They loved it. I was invited to their downtown office to meet the marketing head, a man named Dave. He was a fast-talking, slick guy in an expensive suit who seemed more interested in optics than ethics. "This is great stuff, Maya," he said, tapping my proposal. "Just fantastic. The green angle is a huge win for our PR. Looks great for the shareholders, you know?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "So here's the thing. We love the idea of all this." He gestured vaguely at my detailed plans for organic catering and sustainable materials. "But between you and me, just get us the cheapest stuff. As long as it looks sustainable, that's all that really matters. Find us a caterer who can make a salad look fancy, get some bamboo plates from a wholesaler. No one's going to know the difference." He sat back with a self-satisfied smirk. "You help us cut costs on the back end, and there's a very generous bonus in it for you. Let's just call it a logistical efficiency fee." The offer hung in the air. A poisoned apple. The bonus he was implying was more than my rent for an entire year. It was a lifeline. It was financial security. It was everything I had been desperately struggling for. All I had to do was compromise. Just a little. Who would really know? I left his office in a daze, his offer echoing in my mind. The temptation was immense. It was the smart business move, the pragmatic choice. It was the kind of corner-cutting, profit-maximizing decision Trent would have made without a second thought. I spent the entire day agonizing, my stomach twisted in knots. This was the first real test of my company's identity. Of my identity. Was Viridian Events a brand with a genuine mission, or was it just clever marketing? Finally, my hands trembling, I called the one person I knew would give me an honest, unvarnished opinion. I called Arthur Vance. I explained the situation, the huge contract, the smarmy marketing head, the secret bonus. Arthur listened patiently on the other end of the line, not interrupting once. The silence stretched after I finished, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. "He is asking you to sell your company's soul before it has even learned to walk," Arthur said finally, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "He is asking you to build your house on a foundation of lies." He paused, and I could hear him breathing. "Let me tell you a story, Maya. In the final years of my hotel empire, my son-in-law, the one who eventually took it all, came to me with a proposal. We were building our flagship hotel in a new city. He found a concrete supplier who could do the foundation for 30% less than our trusted long-term partner. 30%. It would have saved us millions." I listened, captivated. "I was tired," Arthur continued, his voice heavy with memory. "I was thinking about retirement. I let him convince me. I signed the deal. The concrete was shoddy, inferior. A year after the hotel opened, hairline cracks started appearing in the foundation. We covered them up, of course, patched them over. But I knew that the entire glittering skyscraper was built on a flaw. The day I let him convince me to sign that deal was the day the cracks started to show, not just in the building, but in my company's integrity. And a business without integrity is just a house of cards, waiting for a puff of wind. His story hit me like a physical blow. The shoddy concrete, the cracks in the foundation, It was the perfect metaphor for what Dave was asking me to do. After I hung up with Arthur, my mind was clear. The agonizing conflict was gone, replaced by a cold, certain resolve. I picked up the phone and called Dave. Dave, I said, my voice steady and firm. Thank you again for the offer. However, I'm going to have to respectfully decline. Decline? He sputtered, shocked. This is a huge contract. It is, I agreed. But my company is built on a non-negotiable principle of authenticity and sustainability. What you're asking me to do goes against the very core of my brand. I can't, in good conscience, deliver a fraudulent experience. I lost the contract, the six-figure budget, the career-making opportunity, the financial bonus, all gone. For a full 24 hours, I was convinced I was the world's biggest fool. I sat in my apartment, staring at my dwindling bank account, and felt a wave of despair wash over me. But then, a week later, my phone rang. It was the director of the National Foundation, the one who'd been referred to me by my very first nonprofit client. Maya, she said, her voice warm and professional. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I was speaking with the board of the City Gardens Initiative, and they could not stop singing your praises. They mentioned your unwavering principles. That's exactly the kind of partner we're looking for. We're planning our national conference for next year, and we'd like to discuss a multi-year contract to have Viridian Events manage all of our major functions across the country. I almost dropped the phone. A multi-year contract, with a national foundation. It was bigger and better than the tech company retreat in every possible way. It was a partnership, not just a job. And it had come to me not in spite of my principles, but because of them. My integrity wasn't a liability. It was my greatest asset. My life began to change in quiet, incremental ways. The multi-year contract with the foundation gave me stability. It allowed me to move Viridian Events out of my apartment and into a small, shared office space. I could finally afford to hire a part-time assistant. My success wasn't loud or flashy. It was a slow, steady build, one successful event at a time. I was so focused on the work, so deep in the world I was creating, that I barely thought about my family. Then, one afternoon, my mom called. Her voice was fluttering with a specific kind of excitement, the kind she reserved for local gossip. Maya, darling, you'll never guess who I ran into at the grocery store. Thelma Gable. And she was just going on and on about you. My stomach tightened. Mrs. Gable, our family's neutral observer. Really? I said, trying to sound casual. Oh, yes. She said she'd heard from someone at the City Gardens Initiative that you're doing wonderfully with your little party business. She said you have quite the reputation for being, well, for being very principled. I could practically hear her beaming through the phone. It was the first time she had ever sounded genuinely proud of my work, but the pride was filtered through someone else's approval. Then I heard a voice in the background. It was my sister, Chloe. Her tone was sharp, dismissive. It's not a business, Mom. She's a party planner. Let's not get carried away. The line went quiet for a moment, and my mom came back on, her voice suddenly strained. Anyway, dear, that's wonderful news. We're so happy for you. The call left a sour taste in my mouth. My minor success, my hard-won reputation, had finally reached the palace, and Chloe's reaction was exactly what I should have expected, a quick, casual dismissal designed to put me back in my box. It was a warning shot. 2 weeks later, the real attack came. I received an urgent email from the director of the National Foundation. The subject line was urgent, press inquiry. My heart leaped into my throat. She wanted to schedule an emergency video call for that afternoon. When I joined the call, her face, usually so warm, was tight with concern. She shared her screen. On it was an article from an influential, widely read industry blog, the kind that corporate sponsors and donors pay close attention to. The headline was brutal: "The Greenwashing Grift. Are ethical event planners selling a feel-good lie?" The article didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. It described in precise detail a fast-rising, female-led, sustainable events company that had recently secured a major contract with a national foundation. It went on to accuse this unnamed company of being a fraudulent greenwashing scheme. It quoted multiple anonymous sources, supposedly disgruntled former vendors and clients, who questioned the company's certifications and claimed its sustainable practices were just a shallow marketing ploy. Every detail was a twisted, funhouse mirror version of my own story. Maya, the director said, her voice grave. Our board saw this. Our donors have been calling. We believe in you, but these are serious allegations. We have to put your contract on hold, pending a full internal investigation. The world tilted on its axis. Put on hold. An investigation. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my small office. The foundation was my anchor, my biggest client, the very bedrock of my company's success. Without them, everything could crumble. I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as a block of ice in my stomach, exactly who was behind this. The anonymous sources. The perfectly timed, reputation-destroying hit piece. Trent had the corporate savvy and the media connections to plant a story like that. He knew which buttons to push, which journalists took tips. And Chloe had the motive. She couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding on my own terms. My quiet, principled success was an indictment of her own shallow, materialistic world. It was a direct, calculated hit, designed not just to knock me down, but to shatter my reputation so completely that I could never get up again. I felt that same cold dread from Christmas Eve, that feeling of being targeted and erased. But this time, it wasn't just humiliation. It was mixed with a pure, white-hot fury. They weren't content to laugh at me, to call me a loser and a nobody. When that didn't work, when I started to build something for myself anyway, they had to actively, maliciously try to destroy it. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was war. The article felt like a death blow. My part-time assistant looked at me with worried eyes, the foundation's email open on my screen like a verdict. For a few hours, I let the panic wash over me. I felt the floor giving way, the same feeling I'd had at Chloe's dinner table. They had found my one point of vulnerability, my reputation, and driven a knife into it. I imagined them talking about it. Trent smirking as he explained how he'd fed the story to a friendly blogger, Chloe nodding with grim satisfaction. The thought made my blood run cold. Then, I picked up the phone and called Arthur Vance. I read him the article, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely contain. I told him about the foundation putting my contract on hold. I expected him to be angry, to tell me I'd been careless. Instead, he was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It wasn't the harsh, critical tone of my mentor. It was the calm, measured voice of a general surveying a battlefield. "They're scared of you," he said simply. The words cut through my panic. "What?" "This is not the act of people who think you are a nobody, Maya," he explained, a rare glimmer of something that sounded like pride in his voice. "This is the act of people who see you as a threat. They ignored you, then they mocked you. Now they are fighting you. This isn't a setback. It's a declaration of war. You just need better weapons." His words recalibrated my entire perspective. He was right. This attack wasn't a sign of my failure. It was proof of my success. I had become a big enough blip on their radar to warrant a targeted strike. "What do I do, Arthur?" I asked. "You fight back," he said, "but not in the way they expect." He made a call. The next day, I wasn't in my small, rented office. I was in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper. Arthur was there, looking more at home than I'd ever seen him. With us were 3 people, 2 men and a woman in impeccably tailored suits. They were the partners of a private equity group, one Arthur had a long and complicated history with. They specialized in what they called impact investing, funding businesses that were not only profitable, but also had a positive social or environmental mission. I was terrified. These were people who dealt in eight-figure deals, who could make or break companies with a single phone call. I took a deep breath, channeling all the confidence I could muster. I started by showing them the libelous article. I let them read the toxic words. Then I began my presentation. Calmly, methodically, I presented evidence that debunked every single claim. For the questionable certifications, I produced the official time-stamped documents from my online course and 3 subsequent ones I'd completed. For the unnamed, disgruntled vendors, I presented signed affidavits and glowing testimonials from every single supplier I had ever worked with. I showed them my meticulous, transparent accounting. I didn't just defend myself. That would have been playing their game. Instead, I went on the offensive. I laid out a 5-year growth plan for Viridian, a plan that went far beyond just planning events. I talked about vertical integration, about acquiring our own sustainable supply chains to control quality and cost. I talked about expanding into corporate consulting, about franchising the Viridian model. And then I unveiled my riskiest, most ambitious idea, acquiring and transforming a mismanaged property into the nation's first fully sustainable, 5-star corporate retreat and resort. When I finished, the room was silent. I had laid everything on the table. The lead partner, a sharp woman named Miss Evans, looked at Arthur, then back at me. "The people who planted this article," she said, her voice cool and analytical, "they meant to destroy you. Instead, they just delivered you to our doorstep. They didn't just offer to help me fight the bad press, they offered me a massive line of credit. A war chest that was far beyond anything I could have imagined. They were buying into my vision. All of it. With their backing, I made my next move. A strategic retreat into the shadows. We decided that I needed to become a ghost. I officially stepped down as CEO of Viridian Events. We hired a talented, experienced executive to become the new public-facing leader of the company. On paper, I was just a silent partner with a minority stake. In reality, I was the sole owner of the newly formed parent corporation, Viridian Holdings, and I controlled everything from behind the scenes. My name was scrubbed from the public record, hidden behind a maze of corporate structures. Then, we started to build my secret empire. With the new capital, Viridian Holdings began acquiring struggling suppliers, just as I had planned. We bought a majority stake in a small organic farm that was on the brink of foreclosure. We acquired a green logistics company with a fleet of electric vehicles. Each acquisition was a quiet, strategic move, strengthening my supply chain and my bottom line. And then, we made our biggest move. We found the perfect property for my resort concept, the Blackwood Resort. It was a gorgeous, historic lakeside property with incredible potential. But it had been mismanaged for years and was bleeding money. The owners were desperate to sell. We made an all-cash offer through a shell corporation. They accepted without hesitation. The deal was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in October. I sat in a lawyer's office and signed the final papers. Just like that. I, Maya Jensen, the family failure, the nobody, the girl who used to count loose change for bus fare, was the sole, secret owner of a multi-million-dollar resort. No one in my family had a clue. They thought they had crushed me. In reality, they had just given me the fuel I needed to build an empire. A year passed, a year of silent, relentless work. My life was completely unrecognizable from the one I had lived before. My days were a blur of high-level strategy meetings with my executive team, poring over financial projections, and overseeing the multi-million-dollar top-to-bottom renovation of the Blackwood Resort. We were transforming it into a state-of-the-art, sustainable luxury destination. I lived in a modest but comfortable condo downtown, a place that was clean, safe, and entirely my own. My name wasn't on the company website or in any press releases. I was a ghost, a puppeteer pulling the strings from the shadows, and that was exactly how I wanted it. My power was in my anonymity. The work was my life. I had built a new family of sorts, my CEO, my management team, and Arthur Vance, who now sat on my board as my most trusted advisor. The foundation had, of course, concluded their investigation months ago, found the allegations to be baseless, and reinstated my contract with a formal apology. Viridian Events was now more successful than ever. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was my mother, Carol. The subject line, written in a cheerful, almost desperate font, was "Let's all be together." It was an invite, an electronic invitation to the annual Jensen family Christmas Eve dinner. My first, visceral instinct was to drag it straight to the trash folder. The thought of walking back into that house, of sitting at that table, felt like willingly walking into a cage. It was another stage for my family to perform their tired toxic drama, with me cast in my usual role of the disappointing daughter. Why would I ever subject myself to that again? I had moved on. I had won. I didn't need to see them. But I hesitated. Something held me back. I minimized the email and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to distract myself with blueprints and budget reports, but the invitation loomed in the back of my mind. That evening, I took a walk. I ended up at the Blackwood Resort. It was my favorite time to visit, after the construction crews had gone home for the day. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the half-finished terrace, overlooking the serene lake. I pulled out my phone and called Arthur. I told him about the invitation. I told him I was going to delete it. He listened, as he always did. "Let me ask you a question, Maya," he said, when I was finished. "Are you the same broke, scared girl who walked out of their house 2 years ago?" I looked out over the vast expanse of the property that I owned. I thought about the company I had built, the team I led, the future I was creating. "No," I said, and my voice was steady and clear. There was no doubt in it at all. "I'm good," he replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Then you need to understand something. An invitation from them is no longer a summons. You are not being called to the principal's office. It's an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" I asked. "More humiliation?" "No," Arthur said firmly. "An opportunity to close the book. You don't have to prove anything to them, Maya. You've already proven it to yourself. But going there, on your own terms, as the person you are now, that's not for them. That's for you. It's the final chapter. You own the resort, Maya. You own the land they stand on, figuratively speaking. Go, look them in the eye, and then, walk away for good." His words settled deep inside me. He was right. Avoiding them felt like hiding. It felt like I was still scared of them, and I wasn't. Not anymore. I ended the call, took one last look at my rising empire, and walked back to my car. I went home, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Evite. I clicked the button. RSVP. Yes. And in the little comment box, I typed 2 simple words. Looking forward to it. Walking through my parents' front door on Christmas Eve felt like stepping onto a meticulously designed stage set. The air was thick with the same sense of pine and cloves, the same oppressive sense of forced cheer. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, which only highlighted how much I had changed. 2 years ago, I had walked in here feeling like a trespasser. Tonight, I felt like an anthropologist, observing a strange, foreign culture. My mother greeted me with her usual flurry of nervous energy. "Maya, you're here. You look well." She seemed at a loss for words. I was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress made of heavy silk. It was understated but expensive, and she knew it. It didn't compute with the image of me she held in her head. The center of gravity, as always, was Chloe and Trent. They were holding court in the living room, veranded by my parents, and a few other relatives, all of them listening with rapt attention. Trent, looking more self-satisfied than ever, was boasting loudly. "It's a massive deal for the company," he was saying, puffing out his chest as he swirled a glass of red wine. "The entire spring tech conference. It's make or break for our new product launch." "And you secured the venue, honey?" Chloe prompted. beaming at him with proprietary pride. Locked it down myself, Trent confirmed. The Blackwood Resort. Heard of it? It's been completely renovated, top to bottom. Place is stunning now. The owners are very mysterious. Some quiet investment group. But they know quality. This deal, when I pull it off, is my ticket to the senior VP position. Guaranteed. He took a triumphant sip of his wine, and his eyes landed on me as I walked into the room. A familiar, condescending smirk spread across his face. Chloe's gaze followed his, and her smile tightened. "Wow, Trent! A senior VP," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she looked directly at me. "That's incredible." Meanwhile, Maya is still playing with her little biodegradable plates. Right? "I heard from Mom you're still doing that. It's so quaint." 2 years ago, a comment like that would have eviscerated me. It would have sent a hot flush of shame up my neck and made me want to shrink into the wallpaper. Tonight, I just smiled. A calm, quiet, genuine smile. "Something like that," I said, my voice even. My reaction, or lack thereof, threw them off. It was like they had pushed a button, expecting a jolt of electricity, and instead, nothing happened. My quiet confidence was a foreign element in their carefully controlled environment, and it unnerved them. They exchanged a quick, confused glance. I took a glass of sparkling water and found a seat near Mrs. Gable. She was here again, a constant presence at these family rituals. She had aged a little in the last 2 years, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She was observing me with a new, intense curiosity. She wasn't looking at me with pity anymore. She was looking at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She could tell something fundamental had shifted, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. "It's good to see you, Maya," she said, her voice a low murmur. "You look very serene." "It's good to see you too, Mrs. Gable," I replied. "I feel serene." The meal was an almost perfect reenactment of the dinner from 2 years ago. It was a masterclass in my family's dysfunction. My father fawned over Trent, asking him endless questions about his work. My mother fussed over Chloe, complimenting her dress, her hair, her strategic choice of napkin rings. And I was largely ignored, an afterthought at the far end of the table. But this time, it didn't hurt. I felt strangely, wonderfully detached. It was like watching a play where I already knew all the lines. I ate my food, listened to the conversation, and felt a profound sense of peace. I wasn't their victim anymore. I wasn't their project or their disappointment. I was just a visitor from another world, one they couldn't see and would never understand. I was just waiting for the curtain to rise on the final act, and I knew it wouldn't be long now. I had made a phone call before I arrived. The final piece was already in motion. As my mother brought out the dessert, a massive trifle shimmering under the dining room chandelier, Trent's phone, which was sitting face up on the table, began to vibrate. It didn't just ring, it buzzed with a frantic, insistent violence against the polished wood. A series of texts were lighting up the screen, one after another. He glanced down at it, a forkful of trifle halfway to his mouth. I watched his face closely. The smug, confident mask he always wore began to crack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. His eyes widened, and his jaw went slack. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "Excuse me," he muttered, his voice suddenly hoarse. He pushed his chair back abruptly and rushed out of the dining room into the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear. I could hear his muffled, panicked voice from the other room. A tense, awkward silence fell over the table. Chloe shot an anxious glance toward the hallway, her perfect hostess smile faltering. My father cleared his throat. Then, the doorbell rang. The sharp, clean chime cut through the strained atmosphere. "I'll get it," my father said, seeming grateful for the distraction. He walked to the front door. We heard him open it, followed by the sound of a calm, professional female voice. A moment later, my father reappeared in the dining room doorway, looking utterly baffled. Following him was a woman I knew very well, though we had never met in person. It was Ms. Alvarez, the general manager I had personally hired for the Blackwood Resort. She was in her late lodies, with a commanding presence and an expression of unshakable professional poise. She wore a sharp, dark gray tailored suit that made her look like she had just stepped out of a high-powered board meeting, which in a way she had. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear and steady as her eyes scanned the room. "I am so sorry for the intrusion on your family dinner. My name is Ms. Alvarez. I'm the general manager of the Blackwood Resort." My mother gasped softly. Chloe stared at her, a flicker of recognition and confusion on her face. Trent must have mentioned her name. "I'm looking for a Miss Maya Jensen?" Miss Alvarez continued, her tone polite but firm. Every single head at the table swiveled to face me. The combined force of their stares was a physical pressure. I felt it, but it didn't touch me. Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a brittle, nervous sound. "Why on earth would you be looking for her?" she asked, the condescension in her voice automatic, a reflex she couldn't control. Miss Alvarez didn't even glance at Chloe. Her focus remained entirely on me. She consulted a tablet she was holding. "I have an urgent logistical confirmation regarding the upcoming Spring Tech Conference," she said, her voice echoing in the dead silent room. "There is a significant change in the acquiring company's executive hosting requirements. I was instructed to deliver the revised contract directly to the owner of our parent corporation, Viridian Holdings, for an immediate signature." She took a step forward, extending the tablet towards me. She looked me directly in the eye, her expression one of pure, respectful professionalism. "Ma'am," she said, "we have a signature line that requires your approval." That one word, "ma'am," hung in the air. It was a bomb that detonated in complete silence. It was a formal, respectful title delivered to me, the family nobody, in front of everyone who had ever dismissed me. It was a wrecking ball to the entire foundation of my family's hierarchy. The world stopped. My father's jaw had literally dropped open. His wineglass, which he had been holding, slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound unnaturally loud in the silence. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was slowly dawning into comprehension. Mrs. Gable, across the table, simply set her fork down very, very slowly, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning, brilliant understanding. And Chloe, my sister, had frozen completely. Her fork, laden with trifle, was stopped an inch from her lips. Her face was a perfect, porcelain mask of horrified shock. The confident, cruel queen of the family had been turned to stone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of red wine seeping into my mother's expensive white rug. Just as the last shard of my father's wineglass settled on the floor, Trent stumbled back into the dining room. His face was pale, slick with a sheen of cold sweat. His tie was askew, and he looked like a man who had just run a marathon and lost. He had clearly just gotten off the phone with his boss, and the news was written all over his face. He saw Ms. Alvarez standing there respectfully holding the tablet out to me. He saw the stunned, frozen faces of my family. He saw the shattered glass on the floor. His panicked eyes darted between Miss Alvarez and me, and a slow, agonizing process of calculation began behind his eyes. The gears were turning, connecting the dots with the grinding slowness of a man whose entire world is being dismantled in real time. "The Blackwood Resort," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He pointed a trembling finger at Miss Alvarez. Then his finger moved to me. "Viridian, the parent company, that's... The question was an accusation, a plea and a statement of dawning horror all at once. I didn't need to say a word. I just gave a slight, calm nod. It was as if that simple motion had severed the last string holding him up. His arrogance, his swagger, the entire smug persona he had built his life around, evaporated in an instant. It was all gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, pathetic desperation underneath. His shoulders slumped. His face crumpled. He took a shaky step towards me, his hands outstretched as if begging for alms. Maya, he croaked, his voice cracking. They fired me, just now. The parent company that bought us out, it's Viridian. My whole division is being eliminated. My position is redundant, effective, immediately. His eyes were wild with panic. Please, you have to help me. A job. Anything. I could be head of sales at the resort. I know the business. Please, Maya. I'll do anything. At the sound of her husband begging me for a job, Chloe finally broke. A terrible, strangled sound tore from her throat. It wasn't a scream or a sob. It was the thud of a pressurized container rupturing, the sound of a reality collapsing in on itself. Her perfect world, a world built on her husband's success and her own unshakable sense of superiority, had just been utterly and completely bulldozed. And I was the one driving the machine. Across the table, Mrs. Gable, our silent jury, slowly shook her head, not in disapproval, but in sheer unadulterated awe. Then she looked at me, and a genuine, admiring smile spread across her face. It was a look of validation, a verdict delivered by the only impartial member of the court. She saw it all, and she understood. My parents, the enablers, were completely speechless. They looked back and forth between their two daughters as if they were seeing us for the first time. On one side of the table was Chloe, their golden child, crumbling into a million pieces. On the other side was me, their failure, their afterthought, sitting there as a silent, solid powerhouse, the owner of the very world that had just crushed them. The cognitive dissonance was so great it had short-circuited their brains. They could only stare, their faces blank with shock. I took the tablet from Ms. Alvarez's steady hand. I ignored Trent's desperate, pleading eyes. I calmly scanned the document, then signed my name on the digital line with my finger. I handed it back to Ms. Alvarez. "Thank you, Ms. Alvarez," I said, my voice clear and professional. "That's all for tonight." "Of course, ma'am," she replied with a slight nod, before turning and walking silently out of the house. Then, and only then, did I turn my attention to the wreckage. I looked at Trent, my brother-in-law, who was still standing there, a broken man in a bespoke suit. I gave him a calm, level look. There was no triumph in my eyes, no glee, just a simple, factual finality. "I'm sorry to hear about your job, Trent," I said, my voice even and cool. "Business is business." I paused for a beat, letting the words sink in. "Please send my regards to your new boss." 3 months later, I was standing on the grand, sweeping terrace of the Blackwood Resort. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a breathtaking palette of pink and gold across the surface of the perfectly still lake. The air was crisp and clean and smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. The last of the construction was finished. My empire was complete. The Spring Tech Conference, Trent's old conference, had been a roaring success under our management. It had solidified Viridian's reputation as the undisputed leader in luxury, sustainable hospitality. Our bookings were solid for the next 2 years. Arthur Vance was standing beside me, a cup of coffee in his hands. He was no longer just my mentor, he was my trusted advisor, my friend, and the chairman of my board. We stood in comfortable silence for a long time, just watching the day be born. We didn't talk about my family. There was nothing left to say. I'd received one long, rambling, incoherent email from my parents, a few weeks after that Christmas Eve. It was a jumble of confusion, regret, and thinly veiled requests for understanding. They didn't know how to process what had happened. They didn't know who I was anymore, and it terrified them. I never replied. Chloe and Trent had gone completely silent. I heard through Mrs. Gable, who called me once, just to check in, that they had to sell their massive house. Trent was having trouble finding a new position at his level. His reputation had been tied to a company that no longer existed in the same way, a company that was now ultimately owned by me. I didn't feel joy at their downfall. I didn't feel a satisfying surge of vengeful pleasure. I didn't need their apology or their remorse. The victory wasn't seeing Trent beg me for a job. The victory wasn't watching Chloe's perfect world shatter. Those were just moments, the noisy, messy fallout of a world I had long since decided to leave. The real victory was this quiet moment, this sunrise, the feeling of the solid stone terrace beneath my feet, a foundation I had laid myself, the quiet confidence, the deep, unshakable pride in what I had built, and the profound, incredible freedom from their judgment. Their opinions, which had once been the sun my entire universe revolved around, were now just distant, irrelevant stars in a galaxy I no longer inhabited. I hadn't set out to destroy their world. I had just refused to live in it any longer. My revenge wasn't a fire that I had lit to burn them down. It was the foundation I had built for myself, stone by methodical, painful stone, until I was standing so high that their shadows could no longer touch me. I was high enough to see the sunrise. My story is proof that the most powerful thing you can do is build a world for yourself that is so strong, their opinions can no longer reach you. Your worth is determined by you, not by the labels people try to put on you. What labels have you refused to accept? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. Thanks for watching.